The exploration vessel New Dawn drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space near the galactic rim. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the stars through the main viewport. At 68 years old, his hair had turned silver gray, and deep lines marked his face like a map of countless battles fought across the galaxy. "Sir, we're detecting some unusual energy readings from the Kepler 442 system," reported Lieutenant Park Mina from her station. Her young voice carried excitement. This was only her third deep space mission, and everything still fascinated her. Tae-ho nodded slowly. "Maintain course. Run a full spectrum analysis." He had been doing survey missions like this for over 4 decades. Most of the time, unusual readings turned out to be nothing more than solar flares or asteroid collisions. But something felt different today. The crew of 47 young officers worked quietly at their stations. The New Dawn wasn't a warship. It was built for exploration and scientific research. Its hull gleamed white against the black of space, marked only with the blue and red symbol of the Human Colonial Survey Division. "Admiral," called out Ensign Choi Hyun-woo from the sensor array. "I'm picking up multiple contacts. Large vessels, sir. Very large." Before Tae-ho could respond, space around them suddenly filled with massive ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. These weren't human vessels. They were enormous, at least 3 times the size of the New Dawn, with hulls that looked like they were carved from black crystal. Strange purple lights pulsed along their surfaces like alien heartbeats. "Shields up. All stop," Tae-ho commanded, but he knew it was already too late. The alien ships had surrounded them completely. A beam of energy struck the New Dawn, but instead of destroying it, the beam seemed to lock onto their hull. Tae-ho felt his ship being pulled toward the largest alien vessel like a fish caught on a line. "Sir, they're jamming our communications." "I can't reach Earth Command," Park Mina reported, her voice tight with worry. The alien flagship was massive beyond imagination. As the New Dawn was drawn into its hangar bay, Tae-ho could see dozens of other ships from different species, all captured like trophies. Some looked ancient, covered in space dust. Others still had scorch marks from recent battles. The hangar doors sealed shut behind them with a sound like thunder. Alien soldiers in crystalline armor surrounded their ship before the engines had even cooled. These beings stood 9 feet tall, their bodies covered in what looked like living crystal that gleamed under the harsh artificial lights. "Attention human vessel," came a voice over their communication system. The words were perfectly clear, but there was something cold and mechanical about the tone. "You will surrender immediately. Any resistance will result in immediate termination." Tae-ho looked around his bridge at his young crew. Some were barely out of the academy. They looked to him for guidance, their faces pale with fear. He had led men and women into battle before, but never in a situation this hopeless. "Power down all systems," he ordered quietly. "Do not resist." The boarding was swift and efficient. Crystal-armored aliens moved through the ship like they had done this 1,000 times before. They herded the human crew into the hangar bay, where more aliens waited with weapons that hummed with dangerous energy. The alien commander was taller than the others, his crystalline armor more elaborate, covered in symbols that probably showed his rank. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely as if it came from inside a cave. "I am Commander Velthrak of the Velkarian Empire," he announced. "You are now prisoners of the Eternal Dominance." His eyes, which glowed like purple gems, fixed on Tae-ho. "You must be their leader." How pathetic. Tae-ho stood straight despite his age, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. Around him, his crew tried to do the same, though some of the younger officers trembled. "Bring them to the interrogation chamber," Velthrak commanded. "The Empire will enjoy watching these primitives." They were marched through corridors that seemed carved from solid crystal. Everything was sharp angles and harsh light, nothing soft or comfortable. Other alien species worked as slaves, their eyes empty of hope. Tae-ho recognized some of them from his academy textbooks, species that had mysteriously disappeared from their home systems decades ago. The interrogation chamber was enormous, designed like an amphitheater. Hundreds of Velkarian soldiers filled the crystalline seats, all watching eagerly. But what made Tae-ho's blood run cold were the screens everywhere, broadcasting to what looked like thousands of other locations across their empire. "Citizens of the Velkarian Empire," Velthrak announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber and presumably across space to distant worlds. "Today we have captured representatives of a new primitive species, humans." Laughter echoed through the chamber and presumably across the empire. It was a sound like breaking glass, sharp and cruel. Velthrak gestured at Tae-ho's simple gray uniform, worn and faded from years of service. Look at this ancient creature. This is what passes for military leadership among these humans. More laughter filled the air. The alien commander walked in a slow circle around the captured humans, his crystalline feet clicking against the floor. They use metal ships powered by chemical rockets. They fight with projectile weapons. They haven't even learned to harness quantum energy. Park Mina stood closer to her admiral, her young face defiant despite her fear. The other crew members formed a protective circle around their commander, showing loyalty even in the face of certain death. But Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood silent and still, his weathered face showing no emotion as alien laughter washed over him like a tide. Commander Velthrak stood tall in the center of the crystalline amphitheater, his purple eyes glowing with satisfaction as he looked down at the captured humans. The thousands of Velkarian citizens watching from across their empire had stopped laughing now. They waited eagerly for what would come next. Before we dispose of these primitives, Velthrak announced, his voice carrying across space to distant worlds, let us discuss the future of their pathetic species. Admiral Kim Tae-ho remained perfectly still, his hands bound behind his back with energy restraints that glowed blue in the harsh light. Around him, his crew of 47 officers stood in a tight group, their faces pale but determined. Lieutenant Park Mina kept glancing at her commander, searching his weathered face for any sign of what he was thinking. Humans, Velthrak continued, walking slowly around the prisoners like a predator circling wounded prey, your species has been expanding into space for what you consider a long time. 50 of your years, perhaps 60? He paused dramatically, letting the question hang in the air. We have been watching you for much longer than that. Every ship you launched, every colony you built, every pathetic attempt at exploration, we observed it all. The alien commander gestured to the massive screens surrounding the chamber. Images appeared showing human colonies, space stations and ships. Tae-ho recognized many of them, New Tokyo orbiting Proxima Centauri, the mining operations around Wolf 359, the agricultural domes on Kepler 442b. At first, we found you amusing, Velthrak said with what might have been a smile on his crystalline features. Like watching children play with primitive toys. Your metal ships crawling through space at such slow speeds. Your weapons that fire simple projectiles. Your computers that can barely calculate basic navigation. Laughter rippled through the alien audience both in the chamber and across their empire. The sound was like wind chimes made of broken glass. But then you began to spread, the commander continued, his voice growing colder. System after system, world after world. You started to become irritating. Like insects that multiply too quickly. Lieutenant Park Mina felt her heart pounding as she listened. She had been so proud when she graduated from the academy, so excited to explore the galaxy. Now she was learning that every human achievement had been watched and judged by these alien beings who saw them as nothing more than pests. The High Council of the Velkarian Empire has decided, Velthrak announced. Your species will surrender immediately and withdraw from all systems beyond your home world. You will return to your little blue planet and never leave it again. The screens changed to show detailed maps of human space. Red markers appeared over every human colony, every space station, every outpost. If you refuse, the alien commander said, his purple eyes growing brighter, we will begin systematic bombardment of your colonies. We will start with your agricultural world of New Busan. Images of New Busan filled the screens. Tae-ho knew the planet well, green fields stretching to the horizon, small farming communities, families who had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives. 3 million innocent people who had no idea they were being discussed as the first target for destruction. Our fleets number in the thousands, Velthrak continued. Each ship carries weapons that can crack planets in half. We have technology that makes your greatest achievements look like cave paintings. More images flashed on the screens, massive Velkarian warships, weapons that glowed with terrible energy, space battles where entire worlds had been destroyed. The alien audience cheered at each display of their military might. Your largest fleet contains perhaps 50 ships, the commander said with obvious amusement. We can deploy 10,000 without difficulty. Your most powerful weapons might damage our hull plating. Our weakest weapons can turn your ships into vapor. Ensign Choi Hyun-woo, the youngest member of the crew at barely 22 years old, began to shake as he listened. He had joined the survey service to see the galaxy, to be part of humanity's expansion into space. Now he was learning that everything he believed about human progress was an illusion. We have conquered over 200 species, Velthrak continued. Some tried to negotiate. Others attempted to hide. A few even tried to fight. He gestured to the alien slaves working throughout the ship. You can see how well that worked for them. Lieutenant Park Mina watched Admiral Tejo's face carefully. The old man had not spoken a word since they were brought to this chamber. He stood perfectly still, his weathered features showing no emotion as the alien commander described humanity's doom. "So now I will give you one chance," Velthrak said, stopping directly in front of Tejo. "You will send a message to your leaders. You will tell them to surrender completely and withdraw all humans to Earth. If they do this within 10 of your days, we will allow your species to live." The crystalline audience across the Empire howled with laughter at what they saw as incredible mercy. "If they refuse," the commander continued, "we will begin the extermination immediately. New Busan will burn first, then New Tokyo, then every human settlement until nothing remains but empty space and floating debris." He leaned down to bring his face closer to the old admirals. "Your pathetic species will kneel or be exterminated. There is no other choice." The chamber fell silent. Thousands of alien beings watched eagerly, waiting to see how this primitive human would react to the inevitable destruction of his kind. Admiral Kim Tae-ho slowly raised his head, his dark eyes meeting the alien commander's purple gaze without flinching. His weathered face showed no fear, no desperation, no plea for mercy. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the vast chamber. "You want war? We will give you war." The crystalline amphitheater erupted in laughter that sounded like 1,000 wind chimes breaking at once. Commander Velthrak's purple eyes glowed brighter as he watched the old human admiral standing defiant before him. Across the Valkyrian Empire, millions of alien citizens watched their screens and laughed at what seemed like the desperate words of a defeated creature. "Did you hear that?" Velthrak announced to his vast audience. "This ancient human thinks his primitive species can wage war against the mighty Valkyrian Empire." The laughter grew louder. Some aliens in the chamber were actually holding their crystalline sides, finding the humans' words the funniest thing they had heard in years. On distant worlds, Valkyrian families gathered around their viewing screens to watch what they thought was the final moment of human stupidity. "War?" Velthrak repeated, his voice dripping with amusement. "What war could you possibly fight? With your metal ships that move slower than our cargo vessels? With your projectile weapons that couldn't scratch our armor? With your 50 ships against our 10,000? Lieutenant Park Mina watched her admiral carefully. Even now, surrounded by enemies and facing certain death, Kim Tae-ho stood perfectly straight. His weathered face showed no emotion, but she noticed something strange. His left hand, hidden behind his back in the energy restraints, was making small movements, tapping patterns against his palm. She had seen him do this before during training exercises. It was an old military code, something he had learned decades ago during his early service. Her heart began to race as she recognized the pattern. He was sending a message. What the laughing aliens didn't know was that Admiral Kim Tae-ho wasn't just any old human soldier. He was a veteran of conflicts that had shaped humanity's expansion into space. During the Centauri Rebellion 20 years ago, he had commanded a small fleet against overwhelming odds and somehow achieved victory. In the Mars Independence War, he had developed new tactics that were still taught at military academies. During the brutal Europa mining conflicts, he had earned a reputation as a man who never gave up, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. But more importantly, the words he had just spoken weren't simply a defiant threat. They were a coded phrase that would activate protocols hidden deep within human space. Far across the galaxy on New Busan, Colonel Lee Soo-jin was working in her office when her secure communication terminal suddenly came alive. The message was brief, just a few words, but she recognized the authorization codes immediately. Her hands moved quickly over the controls as she activated systems that had been waiting dormant for over a decade. Deep beneath the wheat fields of New Busan, massive machines began to hum with power. Defense platforms that had been disguised as irrigation equipment started to rise from their hidden positions. Weapons that could crack asteroids in half emerged from underground bunkers, their targeting systems coming online for the first time since they were installed. On the mining colony of Vega Prime, Captain Yong Hoi-yan received a similar message. The cargo ships in orbit around the planet suddenly began to change. Hull plates slid aside to reveal weapon systems. Engines that had seemed designed for hauling or reconfigured themselves for combat. What had looked like a simple mining operation was revealed to be a heavily armed fortress. Throughout the outer colonies, Commander Choi Yuna watched as her carefully hidden fleet came alive. Ships that had spent years disguised as cargo haulers, research vessels, and mining platforms began to shed their false identities. Civilian crews were replaced by military personnel who had been waiting in secret for this moment. Within hours, humanity's true military strength would be revealed. But the Valkyrian Empire knew none of this. They saw only an old man making empty threats. Enough of this entertainment, Velthrak declared to his audience. It is time to demonstrate what happens to species that defy us. Prepare the first strike against New Busan. We will show these humans what real power looks like. The alien commander turned to his crew. Send Battle Fleet Kethvar to destroy the agricultural world. Use minimal force, we want the other colonies to see what happens to those who resist. Make it quick and clean. Admiral Taeho continued to stand in silence as he listened to the aliens plan the attack on New Busan. His face showed no emotion, but Lieutenant Park Mina could see the slight tension in his shoulders. 3 million innocent people lived on that world, most of them farmers and their families who had never seen combat. Battle Fleet Kethvar consisted of 12 massive Valkyrian warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They moved through space like elegant predators, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. Their weapons could turn entire cities to glass, and their shields could withstand anything the Valkyrians had ever encountered. As the fleet approached New Busan, their sensors showed exactly what they expected, a peaceful agricultural world with small towns scattered across green continents. Primitive orbital stations handled cargo shipments. A few tiny patrol ships moved slowly between the planet and its moons. Everything looked defenseless and helpless. Target the largest population center, commanded Fleet Admiral Zethmore from his flagship. One shot should be sufficient to encourage surrender from the rest of their species. The lead ships began to charge their planet-cracking weapons. Energy readings spiked as the massive guns prepared to fire. In a few moments, the city of New Seoul would be nothing but a smoking crater. But then something unexpected happened. The wheat fields below began to change. Metal structures rose from the ground like deadly flowers blooming in fast motion. Dozens, then hundreds of defense platforms emerged from their hidden positions. Weapon systems that had been sleeping for years suddenly came online with targeting computers that locked onto the Valkyrian fleet. The last thing Fleet Admiral Zethmore saw was the golden fields of New Busan erupting in brilliant flashes of light. The golden wheat fields of New Busan erupted in brilliant flashes of light as hidden defense platforms rose from the earth like deadly metal flowers. Fleet Admiral Zethmore watched in horror from his flagship as weapons he had never seen before locked onto his ships with impossible accuracy. Shields up. Evasive maneuvers, he commanded, but it was already too late. The first volley from the planet's surface struck his lead destroyer with the force of a small sun. The crystalline hull, which had withstood attacks from dozens of conquered species, cracked like an eggshell. The ship spun helplessly through space, its purple lights flickering and dying. How is this possible? Zethmore demanded. Our intelligence reports showed only farmers and primitive settlements. His tactical officer's crystalline hands shook as he read the sensor data. Sir, I'm detecting over 300 weapon platforms. Their energy signatures they're more powerful than our main guns. The battle fleet Kethvar had come expecting to destroy a defenseless agricultural world in minutes. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a carefully planned killing field. Every farm, every irrigation system, every innocent-looking building had hidden humanity's true defensive capabilities. The battle lasted 3 hours. When the smoke cleared, 17 Valkyrian warships floated dead in space while New Busan's defenses stood ready for the next attack. Only 2 alien ships managed to escape, their crews traumatized by what they had witnessed. The news of the defeat spread quickly through Valkyrian space. For the first time in their empire's history, they had lost a major battle to a species they considered primitive. But this was only the beginning. Admiral Han Jiho received the coded activation message while commanding what appeared to be a simple cargo convoy near the Vega system. Her ships looked old and slow, designed for hauling supplies between colonies. The Valkyrians had ignored them completely. That was their first mistake. Within hours, Han Jiho's cargo ships had shed their disguises. Hidden weapon systems emerged from fake cargo bays. Engines designed to look weak suddenly revealed their true power. Her convoy of 12 vessels transformed into a strike force that could challenge any fleet in known space. But instead of attacking Valkyrian warships directly, Han Jiho chose a different strategy. She had studied the aliens' empire carefully during the years of secret preparation. She knew their weakness. Target their supply depots, she ordered her captains. Avoid their military fleets. Hit their fuel stations, their communication relays, their civilian infrastructure. Make them afraid to leave their home systems. The attacks began simultaneously across a dozen star systems. Valkyrian supply convoys that had traveled safely for centuries suddenly found themselves under attack by human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. Communication stations that coordinated their vast empire went silent one by one. Fuel depots that powered their fleets exploded in brilliant fireballs. Captain Nam Jaiwan led the most dangerous missions, boarding actions against Valkyrian ships and stations. Her marines had trained for years in secret, learning to fight in the low gravity and strange environments they would encounter. They wore black armor that absorbed light, making them nearly invisible in the darkness of space. The first Valkyrian crew to face Nam Jaiwan's boarding party was completely unprepared. The crystalline warriors were used to fighting honorable battles between fleets in open space. They had never faced enemies who crawled through ventilation systems, who used explosives to breach hulls, who fought with a savage efficiency that ignored all concepts of civilized warfare. "They fight like animals," reported one surviving Valkyrian officer. "No honor, no rules, no mercy. They use our own ship systems against us. They know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage." Commander Shin Dae-hoon coordinated what humans called psychological warfare, something the Valkyrians had never encountered. He hacked into their communication networks and broadcast images of their defeats across their own empire. Citizens who had laughed at humanity's threats suddenly saw their invincible fleets burning in space. "Look at your mighty warriors," his broadcast declared in perfect Valkyrian language. "See how they flee from human ships. This is what happens to those who threaten our families." The psychological impact was devastating. Valkyrian civilians who had never known fear began to panic. Their leaders tried to block the transmissions, but humans had learned their communication systems too well. The broadcasts continued, showing more defeats, more burning ships, more evidence that their empire was not invincible. What terrified the Valkyrians most was how humans fought. They didn't follow the civilized rules of warfare that governed conflicts between advanced species. They struck without warning, targeted civilian infrastructure, and showed no mercy to enemies who had threatened genocide against their people. When a Valkyrian commander tried to surrender, expecting to be treated as a prisoner of war according to galactic conventions, Captain Nam Jaiwan's response was simple: "You came to exterminate our children. We will show you the same mercy you planned to show them." The aliens had expected to fight a quick, clean war against primitive opponents. Instead, they found themselves facing total warfare conducted by a species that had learned to fight through millennia of conflict on their homeworld. Humans didn't just want to win battles, they wanted to completely destroy any threat to their survival. Within 3 weeks, the Valkyrian Empire's outer territories were in chaos. Their supply lines were cut, their communication networks compromised, their civilian populations terrified. The laughter that had echoed across their space when Admiral Taeho made his threat had been replaced by desperate calls for reinforcements and reports of more defeats. In the crystalline halls of their capital world, Valkyrian leaders who had ruled hundreds of systems for thousands of years finally began to understand the terrible mistake they had made. They had not attacked a primitive species, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The crystalline spires of Valkyra Prime, the Valkyrian Empire's capital world, lay broken and smoking under a blood-red sky. 6 months had passed since Admiral Kim Taeho spoke his fateful words, and the galaxy's most powerful empire was now nothing more than scattered debris and desperate survivors hiding in the ruins of their once great cities. Admiral Taeho, now wearing the insignia of Supreme Commander of Human Forces, walked slowly through the corridors of the Eternal Dominance. The massive flagship that had once been the pride of the Valkyrian fleet was now his command ship. Human technicians worked alongside the few remaining alien crew members who had chosen to cooperate rather than face the same fate as their leaders. The war had been unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Valkyrians had expected a quick, clean victory over primitive humans. Instead, they had faced 6 months of total warfare that slowly strangled their empire to death. Every supply line cut, every communication relay destroyed, every civilian population center turned into a battleground. Lieutenant Park Mina, now promoted to commander and serving as Taeho's aide, walked beside him as they approached the main bridge. She had survived the capture, the interrogation, and everything that followed. Like all of humanity's military personnel, she had learned that war was not a game with rules and honor, it was survival at any cost. "The final resistance pocket on Zethmore surrendered this morning," she reported quietly. "Admiral Han Jiho says their remaining fleet has agreed to unconditional surrender. They're asking for mercy." Taeho nodded without changing his expression. Mercy was something the Valkyrians had not planned to show humanity. They had intended to exterminate every man, woman, and child on human worlds, starting with the peaceful farmers of New Busan. Now they were learning what it meant to face a species that remembered every threat. They entered the Bridge of the Eternal Dominance, where human officers now worked alongside alien technicians who had chosen cooperation over destruction. The massive viewscreen showed the remains of the Valkyrian home system, broken ships floating in space, damaged orbital platforms, and the scarred surface of their capital world below. Captain Nam Jaiwan's voice came over the communication system from her boarding ship. Supreme Commander, we've secured the last government bunker. The High Council is ready for transport. Bring them aboard, Tejo ordered. It's time to finish this. The Valkyrian High Council members who had once ruled hundreds of star systems were escorted onto the bridge in restraints. Their crystalline armor was cracked and dulled, their purple eyes dim with defeat. At their head walked Commander Velthrak, the alien who had laughed at human threats 6 months ago. Now Velthrak looked like a broken creature. His once gleaming armor was scorched black from battle damage. One of his arms hung useless at his side, and his proud bearing had been replaced by the shuffling walk of complete defeat. Kneel, ordered Captain Nam Jaiwan, her voice cold as space. The alien commanders who had once ruled over 200 conquered species slowly dropped to their knees on the deck of their former flagship. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The very chamber where they had broadcast their threats to humanity now witnessed their surrender. Tejo stood before them, his weathered face showing no emotion. Behind him, the viewscreen displayed images from across what had once been the Valkyrian Empire. Burning cities, destroyed fleets, refugees fleeing their homeworlds. This was what happened when a species threatened to exterminate humanity's children. You had superior technology, Tejo said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the bridge and across space to the few remaining Valkyrian worlds. Your ships were faster, your weapons more powerful, your shields stronger than anything we possessed. Velthrak raised his head slightly, his purple eyes meeting those of the human commander. In them, Tejo could see the terrible understanding of what his people had truly faced. But technology alone does not win wars, the Supreme Commander continued. You fought with honor and rules and civilized conduct. We fought to survive. The human crew on the bridge stood silently, their faces hard with the memory of 6 months of brutal warfare. They had learned to fight without mercy against an enemy that had planned their genocide. They had adapted, improvised, and overcome obstacles that should have been impossible. You conquered species that surrendered when defeat seemed certain, Tejo said. You ruled over civilizations that accepted slavery rather than face extinction. You had never encountered a species that would fight to the death for their freedom. Commander Shin Dae-hoon stepped forward with a data pad showing casualty reports. The numbers were staggering: entire Valkyrian battle fleets destroyed, hundreds of worlds occupied or abandoned, millions of alien civilians fleeing into deep space. Humanity comes from a world that survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and countless wars between our own kind, Tejo explained. We are the descendants of every human who refused to give up when extinction seemed certain. We learned to fight not because we enjoyed it, but because those who couldn't fight didn't survive to have children. Velthrak finally understood what his empire had awakened. Not a primitive species playing at war, but the inheritors of billions of years of natural selection that had produced the ultimate survivors. We didn't want this war, Tejo said, his words being broadcast across the galaxy to every species that might be listening. But you asked for it and we delivered exactly what we promised. He turned to look at the view screen showing the ruins of the Valkyrian capital. Let this be a lesson to any species that considers threatening humanity. We are not conquerors seeking empire. We are explorers seeking knowledge. But if you threaten our families, our children, our future, we will show you what 6 billion years of evolution has taught us about survival. The broken alien commanders were led away to face judgment for their crimes. Within days, human fleets would begin returning to peaceful exploration, carrying with them a reputation that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Never underestimate the species that learned to fight on Earth.